Thank you very much, David and Debbie. I appreciate it. It's always an honor to come back. It's great to see so many people here on a school day. Is there anyone sort of, skipping work to be here? It's dark. You can raise your hand. Or, I appreciate that. So I'll definitely try and give you your money's worth here today. I don't know how much you paid to get in, but we're going to be talking about street photography. And this was one of the first pictures that kind of inspired me because it was kind of a mistake. Backlit at a local pool, but I realized that, and it was a good realization for me, that reality is a little overrated sometimes. And sometimes the image could be even better or different from reality. And that little light bulb went on, and that for me really kind of pushed me into photography because, like you are experiencing, it's a way to communicate. Cartier-Bresson, it's a way to shout how you feel. Very quietly. So I would take a camera with me everywhere. I'm basically a shy person at heart, but when I hit the streets, I'm there with a mission. And it's hard to take a picture like this on a city bus or a subway, but I do it. I get out of my comfort zone. This was taken, I was probably about 14, 15 years old, and I have my camera with me all the time. This was shot a few weeks ago, okay, a little longer than that. It's been stressful. It's been really stressful. I'm standing next to a famous photographer who I know Debbie knows. You know who that is? Josef Karsh. And she was telling me, and I didn't know this, that of course he's from my native Canada, lived in the Wilfrid Laurier fancy hotel next to Parliament in Ottawa many years, and that's where he would often get his famous subjects. But he had a studio here, and she was saying that he would charge, I think, $20,000. This was in the 80s to do a portrait. So I'm going to talk about street photography, and there are a lot of labels, and everyone has a different definition about what the street is, and mine is kind of broad. David mentioned this book, The Passionate Photographer. I haven't read it. It's got good reviews. I wrote it, but in it I basically build out everything that I knew from my own experience in photography. And I'll just briefly go through the 10 steps, if you will, because I think that a lot of them very much apply to the street and shooting in the street. So the first one is passion an inch wide, a mile deep. And I think that because we're in this room, your time is valuable, you're passionate. You want to kind of move forward in the work that you're doing. And we all can move forward in the work that you're doing. In my experience, the best way to do that is to find that one kind of project or theme that really sort of forces you to create a set of pictures. And when you try and create a set of pictures, even if it's your portfolio, you realize that if two pictures are maybe similar, you have to kind of choose the strongest one. If two pictures are saying the same thing, you kind of have to make the tough decision. And you can't always do it on your own, and we'll talk about that when it comes to editing. So I find that even on the street and the workshop, it sometimes helps people because, if it's too wide open, you kind of don't know what to do. But if you know what you're looking for, it's easier to find it. So there are ways that you can kind of channel your energy on the street into a set of pictures that really gets you excited about street photography. Now, I think it was Deanne Arbus, the great Deanne Arbus. She said something to the effect that the more personal you make it, the more universal it becomes. And that can be very liberating as a photographer, almost scary, because basically it's saying, look, get selfish and figure out what it is that is personal to you that you want to kind of aim your camera at. And the more personal you make it, the more interesting it is to everybody else, because it's not necessarily your idea of what you think is a good photograph or street photograph. It's personal. And as human beings, we can all relate to it. Not everyone's going to love it, maybe, but chances are it's going to stand out from everybody else's work. Going through a volume of work, there's no question, and street shooters know that you have to go through a volume of work. And in my experience, the more you shoot, the luckier you get, as mentioned, but also, your process. I mean, every time you go out, you always hope for that 5-star image. It doesn't happen all the time. It's a little bit of a law of averages. But the great Cartier-Bresson himself said that you have to milk the cow quite a lot, get plenty milk to make a little cheese. And by that, I think he's saying, the more you're out there, the more you're shooting, the more you have the opportunity of getting that great shot. You know, if you stop here and the picture happens just as you leave, you know, you missed it. And I'll mention Cartier-Bresson because, you know, he's arguably the most influential street photographer, magnum photographer, you know, at his retrospective. And he lived to, I think it was 95, you know, 80 years of shooting, and how many pictures represented him? I mean, I'm sure he shot hundreds of thousands, if not millions of frames, but maybe it's that 200 pictures, and that's what it takes. So going through a volume of work, you know, I think there's a way to do it. And it's not just holding that button down, but for me it's about starting with that one shot and then moving around and working it. Because if you go through the volume, if you get out of your comfort zone, and I know that I'm not supposed to stray too far from the video camera, but if you come up really close and you move around and you see what things look like through the viewfinder, and it's digital, so you just shoot, don't think. That process of going through the volume and then editing and seeing what worked out opens up new avenues for you. And eventually, with success by working the subject, by shooting a little more, it gets kind of infused into your process so that you can fast track to where the stronger images are. In the book, I talk about the lonely adventurer, and what I'm really saying is to do your best work, you kind of have to be on your own. If you really want to get your best work, it's kind of a lonely thing to do. You're out on your own. You've got to sort of learn to concentrate. I'm in a place where there's so much going on, you're at a parade or whatever, that often, and I've been guilty of this, I'm not really concentrating. I'm just kind of there, it's amazing, and I'm shooting it, but I end up sort of capturing the literal as opposed to doing what I know makes the strong pictures. Photographing people, never easy, but it gets easier. Often, it's the sort of engaging with people that for me can be very satisfying, and it's not so much getting a posed people shot, even though you're in that street interaction for just a minute, but you're hoping for something spontaneous. And when something spontaneous happens, that's when those street portraits come alive. The light, I mean, you just have to go and look for the light. And on the street, you know, my rule, and the beauty of the street too, is that light isn't quite as important as it might be in landscape, for example. I mean, you know, sometimes if the light is harsh, that could be really good for a street shot. You're not out to flatter, but you're not necessarily out to sort of make anyone look bad. But I go to where the light is shining. If there's sunlight, I'll go to where the light is, and I'll maybe start there, because where there's sunlight, there's also shade. And you know, sometimes the pictures are just about the light. So for me, getting to the light is important. If you're into color photography, light is even more important because color can be very distracting. So when you bathe a scene in the golden lights of late afternoon or early morning, those distracting colors become less so because they're kind of overwhelmed by the warm glow. And you know, for me, and it wasn't me who said this, but good color amplifies the content. Editing is impossible, is it not? And especially when you're on the street, and I encourage you to shoot a little more, it means you've got more stuff to go through. Ultimately, I don't think you can edit on your own because when you go out shooting, you come back and the emotional metadata that you attach to the photo when you edit can't be kind of wiped away. And you know, we're all guilty of it. And I think ultimately we need to have other people that you know can articulate, people that we can trust, to give us an opinion on something because we're too close to it, right? I mean, the best pictures, of course, edit themselves, but mostly when you come back, it's a difficult scenario between, yeah, kind of like this one, kind of like this one, and especially if you saw a few of that particular sequence, it can be hard. I talk about assessing strengths and weaknesses, having a plan, and then, you know, sharing your image with the world, website, etc. Photography really is a time machine. It does something unique, and this is the Harold Edgerton 1/1,000,000th of a second shot of a bullet going through an apple. But it is a time machine. You know, nothing freezes time like a still photograph. And you know, you can go down, it's raining out there today, you can go down Times Square. It still kind of looks somewhat Times Square-ish, you know, today, and this was over 50 years ago, of James Dean. But you know, how do you photograph time? I mean, there's probably this body of work by Nicholas Nixon of his wife and 3 sisters over 40 years. I mean, when I go in the bathroom and I squint in the right lights, I see that kid next to Karsh. I won't leave the house until I kind of look the way I want to look. But we're all aging. We don't see it, but the camera does, and it captures it forever. And as a street photographer, we're kind of capturing history, as any kind of photographer does. Zoom lens advantage. Let's talk a little bit about that. Now, uncharacteristic to street photographers is using a longer lens. I think you're being a little bit in your comfort zone if you stay back with the telephoto lens. But that said, you can go with a telephoto lens and you can get pictures, you can isolate people out there that maybe you wouldn't get otherwise. So the zoom lens gives you the flexibility of being able to kind of really come in close. By this I'm talking about the 70 to 200 for these. But I think as a street photographer, as we get a little bit wider, the problem with zooms is that it's just too many choices. So I think that if you have a zoom lens, keep it at a good focal length, like a 35 millimeter, for example, and just leave it there, and then just move yourself, because you're going to, I find, in my experience, learn a lot more about composition and getting great street shots rather than staying in one place and zooming. Now, of course, the prime lens advantage is you don't have that ability, which means that you have to go and move around. So a wide-angle lens. I mean, for me, the 35 millimeter on a full-frame camera is like the perfect focal length. And because the prime lens is a little faster, it allows you a couple of things. It allows you kind of a nicer bokeh. You might be familiar with this guy in Washington Square Park. You get a nice bokeh, out of focus area. So you can shoot with it at night as things get dark, and you can have it with you all the time. The thing about a wide angle, and I'll include 35 as a wide angle, it forces you to get close to your subjects on the street. But there's an intimacy with a wider lens that you can't get with that telephoto lens. It's different. And I always try and keep that lens perpendicular to my subject, because the minute you tilt up or down, you're going to increase the distortion. So that's sort of a good idea. Sometimes compositionally, you have to kind of tilt it to get everything in. Now the normal lens, and it was said that Cartier-Bresson would use kind of a 50, and this was with a 50 1.4. But lately I've been experimenting with a 58, this new beautiful Nikon 58 1.4. And I'm finding that the 58 on the street, or the 50, can be also very nice, but you just have to use it a little bit carefully. The 85 millimeter lens is another one. It allows you to stay back a little bit. You still get that beautiful bokeh. These weren't from New York. Most of these pictures were shot in New York, but these weren't. And it allows you to kind of completely throw things out of focus in the background. So, one of the things, like photograph people passing by perpendicular to your camera for an hour. This is where I got my signature shot. Now this guy, if he didn't do this, I would never use the picture. But because he's doing this, I just love it as my sort of signature street photography shot. And the other thing I've learned too, that sometimes when you see something that's worthwhile, spend some time there. Now on the streets, obviously it's a million things once and forever. But in Times Square, when these puddles were reflecting light, I just stayed in this one place and photographed, because this was better than I was getting any other thing. They were all kind of nice, right? So I want to have a bit of a difficult decision in the end, choosing which picture I'm going to use. Photograph with your iPhone for an hour, your phone for an hour. This was shot with a phone. You can go out with a phone just as a little exercise and just see how things are different as a street photographer without your good gear. See what happens. Photograph is something you would not normally photograph to see what it looks like photographed. That's something that Gary Winogrand said, because in my experience sometimes, wow, this is a good picture, yet in reality it just didn't. So push yourself to take pictures you wouldn't normally get, because that gets into your repertoire. You realize, oh, I'm going to start shooting some of this. I never think to shoot it. And then an editing exercise. Well, in the street workshop, I like to see how people are working it. So I like to see the images before and after to make sure that when it can be worked, they're working it. I know that sometimes it's just a moment that you're trying to capture. All right, well, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.